Idea that I'm going to be harping on for this spring. And when you guys get to the end one day, I'll be also helping you through when you actually get into your project. Mm-hmm. And because of the nature of practitioner research and teacher research, some of the usual ideas around research don't apply very well. So we came up with our own term called trustworthy. And so I'm going to be trying to put together a mind map down here that will put together some ideas of trustworthiness that we use a lot, mm-hmm. and then trying to connect it to some of the ideas that in the book he calls it operating rules of research, and to see like where the overlaps are, where the missing pieces are, and then I'll show you how to follow up on this using that collaborative learning journal, mm-hmm. to kind of unpack this a little bit. But in this book, in this research book that we're using, he uses a lot of sort of the traditional terms of research, and some of those connect to trustworthiness. We have to add some things in the type of research that we do as practitioners in a really messy place like classrooms. Mm-hmm. And it'll be interesting to see what the optometrists do with this, because they're in a messy place, but I just don't think it's as messy. Working with a child with their eyes and trying to help them with their reading, mm-hmm. It seems a little more contained to me than a classroom with 30 kids within a school, within a community, within families. You know what I mean? Mm-hmm. I mean, that's a very complex. And so to research that is just, it's different. So anyway, so we developed this idea of trustworthiness. So back on in the collaborative journal, which I'll show you how to get to this in a minute. You don't need to get to it right now. I've asked the question, and I just added this as sort of a lead-in to what we're doing. It wasn't even there before. What does it mean to be trustworthy? Just give me a few words from everyday language. We'll end up seeing if this has anything to do with trustworthy research in the long run. I think if something or someone is trustworthy, what does that mean to you?
Thinking like they inspire confidence.
Mm-hmm.
It's a double speak, but it seems like somewhere to be trustworthy, it's got to be based on research or based on something somewhere, some type of fact.
Based on
based on fact.
Some form of evidence.
Yeah, exactly.
Right.
Like,
this is what
I say so.
Yeah. This is what we say in the science teaching game a lot. Is this evidence based? We want our students to think of evidence based explanations of things, right? And so so somehow, and then this evidence is a little interesting. What is it that's going to count as evidence, mm-hmm. in the kinds of things that we're going to be doing, and that can vary a little bit. Mm-hmm. Let's see. So I like this idea of inspiring confidence. So if someone or something inspires confidence, what are some features that are exhibited that inspire confidence?
Consistency.
Mm.
Mm-hmm.
Honesty is coming to mind, but I'm not. It's kind of
yeah.
It's like even if it didn't come out the way they want, they still publish it or they still say it.
Oh.
So it's that kind of, maybe you went in thinking this, but then when the research showed this, you still got to say what your research showed.
Interesting. Yeah, I think I was thinking of this today because we're doing this hiring process for someone who's like an internal candidate. And so we're doing it a little bit differently. and I'm thinking about like I'm gonna be kind of helping the person make their case in a way, and so you don't want to make it look like everything's just perfect. I mean, you want to say, these are the struggles, these are the parts that didn't work, these are the exceptions, these are the questions or the puzzles that are still there. And in a way, when people just do that, doesn't it inspire a little more confidence? If you're just you're just putting it all out there, let it.
Yeah. It's like you said, you paint a rosy picture, somewhere people are going to lose it.
Right. So we have.
Telling it as it is.
Yeah, exactly.
Telling the good and the bad. Yeah.
Right, and so so I think the stories of practitioner research have to do that. I mean, they have to get deep enough into it that you see a fuller picture of the story that includes all the rough spots and the things the things that didn't turn out the way you thought. What I really learned from this research was I was thinking the wrong thing from the very beginning. Well, that says something. That to me, that adds something to the work. A statement like that isn't something to avoid.
Right.
So that kind of all goes into honesty, or maybe even something maybe a little deeper than honesty, but a sense of like uncovering, or not really vulnerable, but like transparent. Being trying to be as transparent as you can. Yeah. I'm seeing the situation this way, but I know there's 3 other ways to look at it, and here are some. Here's what a friend told me. Here's what my trusted colleague she sees it a little bit differently. Well, I'll tell you about that, and then you the reader or the hearer can help kind of weigh that out for yourself a little bit. Interesting. Okay, so we have. I'm going to kind of try to draw this diagram here. So we have trustworthy practitioner research, and we'll just make that like TPR for short, and then we'll make rules of operation like ROO for short. So you'll see this in our.
Do we have that? We're going to have that.
Yeah, you're going to have that.
Okay.
Yeah, it's in that document, and so let's see. So probably the biggest thing. All these are important, but one of the critical pieces about practitioner research that I want to suggest is really important is that practitioner research results in meaningful action. Now there are types of research that are done just like for the pure sake of knowledge, and they may lead to meaningful action somehow, someday, somewhere. I teach astronomy, and most people think that like searching for dark matter in the universe is kind of like, well, that's cool, but what is that? How does that help us? And so that would be more like a purer form of research, I guess, which is fine. But as practitioners, that's not necessarily what we're about. I mean, we may have those questions, but we're trying to search for knowledge, answers, understandings that will create something meaningful. I mean, if not right this minute, in our practice soon. We want kids to learn more. Yeah. We want kids to have better outcomes. We want to keep kids in education that. You know what I mean? We want to provide those supports, and we don't want it to be later. We want it to be something now, and so meaningful action is one piece. Along with that, well, kind of not really the opposite of that is this thing called self-reflexivity. So there's a little jargon going on here. But that's why I'm trying to help explain it. There's definitions of this in the Collaborative Learning Journal. I'll show you that. But it's a little bit like you've heard of self-reflection. You know what that is? Like I'm gonna reflect on my lesson. This lesson. Well, the new people, well, it went fine.
Yeah.
Okay, tell me more. Self-reflexivity is more of it's a process that sort of adds up over time to where something you may have thought quite deeply or believed in quite deeply or had an assumption about ends up actually changing. That you're allowing the research work not just to sort of answer or work with the external question that you may have been dealing with. How do I get my level reading group, my top leveled group, what kinds of tools can I give them to be more independent so I can work with this other group over here? Okay, that's one level of the question. But then as you go through the process, like, what did I learn about readers that I was kind of mistaken about initially? A deeper, a big assumption about students I had might change, or about why we're even, you know what I mean? A deeper thing. So on one hand, you've got this meaningful action, which is sort of maybe an external result, but then there's also, I believe, anyway, in trustworthy practitioner research, a sense of a change on the part of the researcher. And that's really different from like the scientific paradigm of research. He, in the book, he kind of starts off this chapter with a long lecture about the scientific method. And I'm kind of like, the scientific method is fine as a way to write up how science works, but what's really happening is always a lot more complicated and a lot messier than, the scientific method is like the science project, find a question, test the hypothesis and all that. Stuff, but this sense of self-reflexivity, making that evident in the work you're doing as a practitioner research and talking about that and making that part of the result is part of what we're calling trustworthy for this type of research. If you don't do that, well, it may be happening, but it's good if you put that in and feature that. Now, with the pre-service teachers, it all comes down to that. That's the real work.
Yeah.
They're doing something out here. They want to better understand something that's a little bit out here, but they're in such a process of change that what it's really about is like realizing what the real question should have been. Or, gosh, I thought kids acted this way because of this reason, but I really found out it was this reason. And that becomes that's a self thing. I now believe something different. So that becomes really important. Yeah. But I think for anyone in a practitioner situation, teachers or whatever, this internal piece, I think we're always becoming. We're always becoming a different teacher. We're always becoming a different practitioner. And we become more skilled and we know what we're talking about. So we have this meaningful action part going too, but hopefully we're reflecting within as we do it.
Through my years, my 4 years of experience, every year has been different, and it's I think each group of kids is different, so that makes even me different. I'm like, it worked for this group. Why doesn't it work for this group?
Right. We always, when we've had a beer or two, it's like good teaching is pretty much impossible because what starts to work changes because the context changes. Something changes. The kids change. That's why curriculums don't work because they test them on normal kids somewhere in an undisclosed location, but then you have to get them with your kids, and then you have to start adapting everything.
Yeah.
Oh boy,
yes.
really?
Right? Yeah. Yes. And so some people get frustrated with that, and it's a lot of work. But that's, I don't know how to expect anything else. They can't design this for our kids. And then you get it adapted for one group of kids, and then the next year you have to readapt it, and so on. So you're in a steep part of the curve of sort of. You're still maybe trying to kind of figure out what kind of teacher you're becoming. It keeps changing as the challenges change. Think if you changed grades.
Oh yeah.
Drastically.
Yeah.
Okay, you're going to be teaching fifth graders next year or something. Oh man. Okay, yeah. So, for younger teachers, even making that journey an important part of the process to be, being aware of that. I think is a really neat part of it,
Don't deny it.
Yeah, right.
Embrace it.
Exactly. So, so a couple other things. So we think that trustworthy research has what we call a sense of connection. And that sense of connection is to the context of your practice. So this research evolved out of problems or issues or questions I have about my classroom, my school, my community, my setting. It didn't just come out of nowhere. It came out of something that that I know, I want to have happen to make school better. And then also a sense of but it can't just be that. It can't just be all about me. That there's a connection to the word we use sometimes is distant colleagues. So, you have an issue. Well, someone else out there has had that issue in their own setting and has written about it and done research about it and published things about it. Mm-hmm. And so that's going to be kind of a focus that we'll look at a lot initially, is just how do we find those connections? We read different things, and but there's different kind of levels of that. There's distant colleagues who are way into it. Mm-hmm. When you go to the PDs and they bring in the person and they're from the outside and they're way into it. Well, I want to connect to that. I also want to connect to other practitioners like me, mm-hmm. Who are just looking at this. So that sense of connection is important. Let's see. There's a couple more. So this one is called multiple perspectives. And I think this probably ties in a little bit to the believability, a little bit to the let the reader or the hearer make some of their own thoughts and decisions about this. So I may be researching. We've got the new reading curriculum, and it's kind of scripted, but it's kind of good. But I'm not sure how to implement it. I want to adapt it, and so this is going to be my project. I'm going to figure this out. Well, I don't want to just have my results be based on my own thinking, in my own head. Mm-hmm. I can get other perspectives, like, well, what are the kids? How do the kids experience this? Frankly, how do they talk about it? How do parents experience this? The stuff we send home. How do my administrators think about? How are they thinking about this? How are my colleagues thinking about this? Find some that really love it, find some that really hate it, and listen and make these multiple layers of perspectives kind of evident in the work. So your work has a lot of different voices in it than just your voice. And then finally, of course, data, evidence. So we might have to broaden our view of what data can be or what it is, but later on we'll be into different different sources of data. And we use the term, when you have a lot of data and it's from a lot of different places and perspectives, we call it thick. It's thick. You got thick evidence. Mm-hmm. You can tell this story in a lot of different ways. Maybe you have to show some numbers. Maybe you have to tell some stories. Maybe you have to look at some videos or audio of what it is that's going on. You had to do some interviews. But ultimately, all those things are pointing in a general direction that you're trying to point out. But if all those things are kind of pointing in that direction, they're kind of trustworthy. If all of these different voices, but they're all multiple perspectives, but you can tease out what they're all saying that's in common, then that becomes a piece of trustworthiness. So none of this really works without that evidence piece. And you had pointed that out probably because we're in this class, but somehow this is research, so it must be based on evidence of some, in there. And so the quality of that is ultimately like a really central thing. And the quality of that and the working through that is what can kind of give you a different voice about talking about it. If you bring together these different pieces and you start saying, hey, you're in a meeting and you start speaking about that thing that you've really looked into, that your tone of voice changes. I mean, I've seen it, even in the new teachers. They talk really timidly, but when they get on that topic, they did research on groups and grouping and group learning. Well, let me tell you what we did. Suddenly it changes. And I always hope that they get asked about that when they get interviewed, because then I think the admins can pick up on like, hey, there's leadership potential here, if people can do that. Okay, so what I'm going to have you do